Hey everybody, Rob Simopoulos from Defendify. Excited today about the conversation we're having here with Alan Wade. I also am joined by the wonderful Shanna Utgard, who's our success manager here at Defendify. Shanna, I know you're going to help us moderate and stay on track here with the webinar.
I would love to. I see some familiar faces piling in here. So hi, everybody. Today, I'm going to be managing the success of this webinar, hopefully. And periodically throughout this discussion, I'm going to be launching a few poll questions.
It's ready to be a great webinar. Alan, thanks again for joining. Let's start off with allowing you to do a little introduction. I'm really interested to hear about your career and, you know, how does someone actually become the CIO of the CIA? How did you get in that role? Maybe you can give us a little bit of background to get started.
Well, thanks, Rob. First, it's a pleasure to be with you today. I was at CIA for 35 years, so I'll save you the long story of what happened during the 35 years, and I'll give you the short story. I'm an engineer by training, and so I joined the agency right out of college. And as you might expect, I spent the early part of my career in the technology programs at the agency. In the mid-1990s, the agency was devastated by the revelation that one of our own employees had been a spy for the Soviet Union, a guy named Rick Ames, who was currently in prison in Pennsylvania. In any event, the discovery that Ames had been successfully spying for the Soviet Union caused a major change in the organization's concepts of security and counterintelligence. And my role in all that was to run the security organization. So I moved out of the technology world and into the security world for a few years. In 2001, as part of another agency reorganization, I became the Chief Information Officer and then was dual-hatted as Chief Information Officer for the intelligence community. So I can't say that it's a predictable path to become the CIO, but that's sort of the way things sometimes happen in the CIA.
Oh, absolutely. And how many years were you in that role for?
I was there for just under 6 years.
Under 6 years. So Alan, in that role, there must have been a number of different pressing initiatives that you were leading. Would you be open to sharing some of those things that you were working on?
I'll mention one that I guess I would characterize as being done under considerable duress. I mentioned that I had become the Chief Information Officer early in 2001. And of course, you know what happened on September 11th of 2001. On September 10th of 2001, the agenda was to find the peace dividend. The country had invested heavily in the agency and the whole defense community. In the preceding decades, we had won the Cold War, the war was over, and we didn't want to continue to make those kind of investments as a country. So we were looking for the defense and intelligence establishments to get smaller. And that's what we were doing at CIA. We were trying to figure out how to reduce the budgets and how to get smaller. With respect to the agency, my piece in that as the CIO was trying to figure out how to squeeze out excess capacity that we had, how to shut down systems that we no longer needed, and how to reduce our budget footprint. And so one of the key ways we were going to do that was by centralizing and consolidating. And the place we were going to centralize and consolidate was the one place in the world where we have excellent physical security, and that's at the CIA headquarters compound. It's the one place in the world where we have a sign that says this is a CIA building. We have our own guards and so forth around the building. So we were bringing in our information assets into that building, centralizing them, and having the desired effect. I mean, the budget was in fact going down and getting smaller. In fact, I remember on the afternoon of September 10th, I had invited in all the contractors and vendors who support the agency from the IT world into the big auditorium that the agency has, and outlined for them what was going to happen in the years ahead. And it was a well thought out strategy about how we were going to get smaller. The next morning, about 9 o'clock in the morning, we got the first word that a plane had flown into the World Trade Center. And while we were trying to figure out what that meant, we got word that a second plane flew into the World Trade Center. And at that moment, we knew that that was an Al-Qaeda attack. And we began to try to figure out what that all meant. What was particularly scary to us in that building was that we knew we had reporting about the plans of a guy named Ramzi Youssef. Ramzi Youssef was a very, very bad guy, a terrorist who is also in prison these days, but at that time, he was a terrorist who had successfully planted bombs on planes in the Philippines, for example. And one of his aspirations was to fly a plane into the CIA headquarters building. So we knew about that reporting at the moment we saw the Al-Qaeda attack. And all of a sudden, the idea of, as the FAA began to shut down the US air system and began to bring planes down, there were two that were not coming down. One of them we know flew into the Pentagon, and that left one more that was flying towards Washington, D.C. And we still don't know exactly what its target was, but we certainly knew of the reporting about Ramzi Youssef's plans. So our strategy of consolidating the CIA headquarters building, which looked so good on September 10th, didn't sound all that brilliant on September 11th.
Right.
And so while we were getting people off the compound, we were also getting information assets off the compound. So, and that resulted in a major redesign of our architecture and so forth, and occupied a lot of the activity over the next couple of years. I would say with respect to the technology that people think about with the agency, people often think about what I guess I would call the tools of espionage. And I will put in a plug here. If you're interested in the tools of espionage, the ways you communicate with agents, or the tiny cameras, or the secret writing, that sort of stuff, I'll put in a plug here for a relatively new museum in Washington, the International Spy Museum, which had the misfortune of trying to open right before the COVID crisis struck. When we can all travel again and you can come to Washington, come to the International Spy Museum. It is terrific. And you will actually get to see some of the things that I worked on during my career.
Oh, amazing. That's a great tip for that trip. Looking forward to that. And thank you so much for sharing, the details of that internal things that were occurring during 9/11. Hey, let's jump into our first audience poll. Shanna, you want to take this over?
Sure, let's launch this. So our first poll question is, do you feel that defending cyber attacks is becoming more or less challenging for your company? We actually have 3 answers you could select here: more challenging, less challenging, or about the same.
All right, where do we land, Shanna?
All right, so let's share these results here. So more challenging, 91% of respondents.
Yeah.
Less challenging, 6%, and about the same, 3%.
Well, I think we can expect that, right? That's what I was expecting for sure. All right. So Alan, next question. You've been in the cybersecurity compliance realm, CIO role. How have things changed in the cyber fight, from back then to today? Can you share a little bit on that front?
Yeah, I would say there are, from my perspective, there have been two big changes over the last, let me say, over the last decade or so. The first is that bad guys have figured out how to make money out of exploiting vulnerabilities. If you go back, 10 years ago or so, the idea of cyber attacks was largely in the realm of cyber warfare. It was one state attacking another state. But more recently, people have figured out how to make money. Mm-hmm. And as they have figured out how to make money, they have found governments that not only tolerate that activity, but support it and endorse it and encourage it. Here in the United States, you don't get away with that. That's regarded as criminal activity, and we will shut it down. We may not get it instantly, but it's criminal activity by the way we think about the world, and we will shut it down. Not all the world believes that. Not all the world operates by the same set of rules. And so there are, unfortunately, a number of countries now that will support what we regard as criminal activity. And they do it for a couple of reasons. One is it brings in significant money into their economies. And secondly, it provides them with a weapon that they don't have to fund. It's sort of a self-funding weapon. And so in many instances now, we have governments that support what we regard as criminal activity. So the normal measures we would have to stop criminal action just don't work. And I'm afraid this is going to get worse before it gets better. So it's one of the sort of
For sure.
clouds as we look forward on the cybersecurity forefront.
Yeah, as an example, the ransomware just increasing year over year, becoming a massive impact. How about on the government front, when we're talking about protecting federal, state, municipality governments from cyber threats? There's a lot of things that are happening on that front. Can you share a little bit of what you're seeing occurring in regards to helping protect them?
Yeah, on the government front, you sort of have to divide the world into what's happening at the state level with what's happening at the federal level. And so it's a particular challenge for businesses to try to keep track of all this. At the state level, I think last year, 30 states passed some form of cyber legislation. And that's been the trend over the last couple of years. About half the states in this country each year will pass some form of cyber legislation. That may be a little distorted right now because a lot of the legislation had to do with election protection and so forth. So maybe next year won't be quite so bad, but you're seeing a lot of legislative activity at the state level. At the federal level, the situation is equally complex. Some brave soul did a count of the number of congressional committees and subcommittees that had asserted some form of jurisdiction over cybersecurity. And I think they stopped counting at 80.
Wow.
So every part of the Congress is looking at cybersecurity, and not all of those 80 committees are ever going to get legislation passed, but it does mean there's a lot to keep track of and a lot happening. So I think you really have to step back from this a little bit and look at the sort of big trends. The big trends in my mind are twofold. One is regulation is coming. It's coming from the state level, it's coming from the federal level, and it's coming because people are in pain. The cybersecurity issues are really causing harm to people. And when people are getting harmed, the government will act. It may not act quickly. It may take longer than we like, but it will act. So I do believe regulation is coming from a lot of different directions. At the federal level in particular, I think the other knot that we have to untie is the conflict between privacy and security. And any security legislation has to be sort of understood through the prism of its implications on privacy. And we don't have a good way of doing that yet. So it's going to be slower than we like. But those, in my view at least, are the big implications looking forward with respect to legislation.
Excellent. Thanks for sharing that. Shannon, we're going to go back to you with another poll. I think it'll be interesting to see how many of what percentage of the people on the call today are under some form of compliance.
Absolutely. So this compliance question is very simple. Is your organization under any type of cybersecurity compliance? Options are yes and no. I'm guessing a lot of people on this webinar are probably going to be under some type of compliance.
We see it continuing to grow, everyone we talk to. All right, Shannon, where are we at?
We have 97% yes, 3% no. Wow.
That's a huge amount. I didn't expect that. Alan, on this topic here, how have you seen compliance shifting? In the past couple of years, we obviously see a huge percentage of people who are now under compliance. Where are the initiatives really coming from? You mentioned state and federal. Any other places that come to mind?
Yeah, I think the way to think about compliance is that it allows us to make fast decisions. Even as consumers, we buy things that are UL certified and so forth. We don't want to do our own analysis about the safety of a product. So I think for all the reasons that we see cybersecurity as a growing issue, we're going to see compliance as a growing issue as well. And it's going to vary depending on the industry sector that you're in. But I think for all the work that we have done compliance to date. We're going to see more stringent requirements issued at all levels of government as we move forward.
Yeah, one of the things I wanted to ask you about was in regards to, compliance being pushed to the supply chain, even from the government side. So as an example, when we think about the DoD with CMMC and DFARS and cybersecurity requirements going to suppliers and so on, maybe you can share with everybody, why are those things exactly are happening?
Yeah, CMMC, for those who haven't followed it, is a maturity model way of thinking about compliance requirements. And without descending too deeply into defense acquisition policy, I would say that until fairly recently, if you were a defense contractor, the Defense Department relied on a lot of representations and certifications that you as a contractor would just assert. You just assert that you comply with certain things. As the importance of the NIST standards, in particular NIST 800, have become with respect to cybersecurity, DoD is looking for more than just my assertion, for example, that I am conducting my business in a way that is compliant with the NIST standards. They are looking for auditability, and auditability means they want third-party auditors. And auditors are not domain experts, so auditors want records. So the whole trend here is that we are going to see an increased burden for not only compliance with the security standards, but also being able to be auditable in our compliance. And all this, as you suggest, Rob, is because of the attempts to protect the defense supply chain. In fact, the supply chain issue has become such an important one. We have a new acronym in Washington. We don't have enough acronyms in Washington. We need a new one. And so the new hot acronym in Washington this year is SCRIM, which stands for Supply Chain Risk Management. Mm-hmm. And I think it all relates to the growing importance of unclassified information and the realization that we have to protect unclassified information through things like CMMC.
Right. Especially when you have, as an example, small manufacturers making single pieces that all come back and are combined. If there's breaches at multiple locations, putting it all together can cause a massive compromise. Shannon, let's go back to one more poll question, because we had 98% of people said that they're under compliance. I think it'll be interesting to see what type of compliance they're under right now.
So a couple options here. We have DFARS, CMMC, HIPAA, FISMA, ISO, customer compliance. So that is, you have large, maybe enterprise clients that you're working with, and they're giving you third-party vendor risk assessments and requiring you to complete very long, very complicated, full of alphabet soup acronyms, because, Washington, I think they're only rivaled by the IT world as far as the alphabet soup.
That's only a small percentage from what we saw already.
Yeah, and we got I love the chat message thing that we got for is there an I don't know.
That's a good point. All right, where are we at, Shanna?
Our results, a lot of, so DFARS and CMMC, about 33%, HIPAA 33%, FISMA 7%, ISO 33%, customer compliance 47%. That's very much aligned with what we're seeing as well.
Absolutely.
Other, so we got 30% others, and then 3% we are not under any compliance.
Yeah, maybe someone could put in the chat and share with us some of the other compliance that they're part of. Definitely the third-party vendor assessments coming from enterprise organizations to smaller entities. That's a trend that's happening quite often. I think we already addressed that one, but this is the question I have in regards to the government and the private sector coming together to work as in tandem to combat cyber threats. We saw the development of the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency as an example of that. Maybe you can share a little bit about what's going on that front and how the government is trying to help small businesses.
Yeah, this is a huge issue, Rob. And I would say that the government is still trying to figure out the best way to engage with the private sector. We have strong concepts here about the separation between public sector and private sector activities. Those, as we talked about earlier, are not shared worldwide, but here in this country, we have strong feelings about what the government should and should not do with respect to protecting the private sector. The current framework relies on activities largely at the Department of Homeland Security. Now, setting aside sort of criminal incidents, there's certainly a law enforcement relationship for criminal incidents, but in terms of things like threat sharing and advice and so forth, the current framework is based on activities at the Department of Homeland Security, and they are focused on that part of the private sector that can be associated with things that are considered important national infrastructure, important national cyber infrastructure. So as you probably know, they have organized 15 or 16 different areas where they have specific information sharing communities. So the financial sector, the energy sector, the transportation sector, and so forth. And so if you aren't participating in one of those sectors, I definitely recommend that you try to figure out how you can get involved. DHS has set up mechanisms to share sensitive threat information with those sectors. And those sectors, they operate a little bit differently, but they're all engaged in trying to make sure that they're not only sharing information with the government, but sharing information as appropriate with each other about what they are seeing. Now that framework, I would say, is widely regarded as inadequate. As effective as it is, it's largely regarded as inadequate for the threats we face in the future. And so I would say in Washington, at least, there's a broad consensus that we need a new national strategy with respect to cybersecurity in general, in part because of this very issue, that is to say, how to inform and energize and support the private sector, large businesses and small businesses. In that regard, I would commend to your attention something that had the misfortune of coming to conclusion last March. So it didn't get the public attention it deserved just because the coronavirus was breaking at that time. But a commission was organized called the Cyber Solarium Commission. This was a commission that involved people both from the Hill and from the executive branch of government, as well as from the private sector, a very interesting composition of this commission. And they made a number of strategic recommendations about how the government could do a better job of engaging with the private sector and how the government could do a better job of organizing itself to protect the country with respect to the cyber issues. So I'm sure in the next administration, this report is going to get an awful lot of attention. It's kind of a tough report to read because it is written essentially to be camera ready to be acted upon in legislation. And if you've ever read legislation, it's not the most entertaining stuff to read, but the report itself is very, very interesting. And I would commend it to you as, I think, signaling the direction the country is going to move in this area.
I believe Senator Angus King was one of the co-chairs in that.
Yes, he was.
That commission, right here from Maine. All right, let's go to the next one here, Alan. So when we think about enterprise organizations and small to mid-sized businesses, sometimes the way they're dealing with cybersecurity and compliance can be different because a lot of times enterprise organizations have full security teams and compliance teams to help assist there. If we really focus on smaller entities, perhaps we look at 1,000 employees and less. What do you feel is one of the biggest challenges they have on the cybersecurity and compliance side right now?
Yeah, the challenges, unfortunately, for small businesses are not unlike those that large enterprises face. But as you say, they don't have the staff that large enterprises have. So sadly, whether you're a large enterprise or a small enterprise, you have to deal with the big issues that I think are facing all of us these days. And because we're all relying more and more on software, we're all facing the same problems. If I were to prioritize just a couple to think about, you mentioned ransomware. That has to be at the top of anyone's list right now.
Yeah.
And it's sad what's happening with respect to ransomware. It's an issue that affects small businesses, large businesses, government organizations. It affects all of us, and one that we all have to focus on. Two others, though, that I think are sort of equally important that don't get the public attention that they should. One of them is insider threat. We don't talk a lot about insider threat because when we deal with an employee who intentionally or maliciously does something to harm an organization, we tend not to talk about it. We tend not to disclose it. But my experience is that we have significant issues with insider threat that affects both small enterprises and large enterprises. And the third that comes to my mind that is really burdening all of us, large and small, is patching. We all rely on software. We know all the software has defects in it. We know the defects get repaired periodically. And the moment the defects are repaired, the bad guys will reverse engineer them and attack those who have not repaired them, who have not patched them. So the urgency of patching and the volume of patching is becoming a huge issue for enterprises large and small.
Right. And one of the biggest parts is that a lot of times they have to do some testing before they can actually implement those patches, or else they may have a critical issue that's deployed through that patch. Really tough. But the vulnerability management side, I agree with you. Big challenge. Let's go back to one more poll. Shanna, over to you.
So this poll question is, who is specifically responsible for leading cybersecurity at your company? So a few options. We have a dedicated security leader, so a CISO, CIO, CSO, someone in a non-security executive role, so another C-level person. Our internal IT staff take care of our cybersecurity needs, or we have an outsourced IT provider who handles it.
This will be interesting to look at, and I think it also depends on the cybersecurity maturity of that organization, a lot of times based on the size of that company as well, and where that's sitting.
All right, so let's end this poll here. We have 21% of a dedicated security leader, 14% is a non-security executive, internal IT staff at 41%, so that was definitely the leader there, and we have an outsourced IT provider who handles it. That fell at about 24%.
Yeah, a lot of times with the IT managed service provider. Absolutely. Interesting. Alan, how about when we talk about and I'm sure you've heard the statement before, bring cybersecurity to the boardroom. Is that happening today? Are you seeing that happening in organizations? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, cybersecurity is becoming a board issue. It absolutely is a board issue. And I would say there are a couple of drivers there. One is legislation. We've talked a little bit about some of the state legislation. And the state legislation tends to vary depending on what the particular issues are that are preeminent in a given state. So if you look at California, for example, their legislative efforts have focused on things like privacy and protection of privacy. If you look at New York, of course, big financial center, their legislation has focused on and the financial sector was one of the earliest sectors that was attacked just viciously. So they've had to deal with the cybersecurity issue, perhaps even before many others have. Their legislation focuses on things like board responsibilities. So the New York legislation requires financial service sector companies of a certain size, at least, to have a CISO. Not all companies, including large companies, did. And it also is requiring boards to identify a focal point who works with a CISO, who understands what questions to ask. So this has created a whole new issue for boards. Many boards are not accustomed to dealing with cybersecurity issues. And frankly, many CISOs and those with security responsibility are not accustomed to dealing with boards. So there's a lot of room here to improve the communication level that we have and to deal at a board level with many of the very difficult security issues that we have. I would say the one other thing that is motivating boards these days is the possibility of lawsuits. In the wake of some of the big cyber incidents that have happened that compromised an awful lot of consumer data, boards were sued. Now, boards are used to dealing with lawsuits, but what's interesting about some of these suits is that they're framed in such a way that the insurance the board members normally have, the normal insurance you have as a director or officer of a company, would not have protected you, because the argument was that boards were acting incompetently in terms of the way cybersecurity was managed. And so that would not have been protected by D&O insurance. When a board director is insured and they are personally liable, that gets their attention in a hurry. So we are seeing boards really focus on this issue. We're seeing questions to CISOs become much sharper than they have been in the past. And I think all this is positive. It's making boards aware of the issues and the risks sometimes that companies are taking that they hadn't been aware of. And the major function of the board is to allocate resources. And so I hope this will result in the allocation of more resources to cybersecurity.
Yeah, so you can expect that possibly we'll see more security professionals sitting in those board seats playing that role.
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying? Yeah, excellent. Let's go on to the next one. How about for security leaders? So if you're a security leader you're a CISO, you're in that seat, you're trying to manage any unique challenges that you're seeing as a trend for them in the cyber landscape?
Yeah, I would say a couple of things that I see a lot or hear a lot from CISOs. One is the talent shortfall. It is just really hard to get people. And with the sophistication of these security issues rising every year, you need really, really good people, really thoughtful people who can not only deal with the technical aspects of cybersecurity, but also understand the business consequences. What really is risky behavior? What is not risky behavior? What do we need to focus on? What do we not need to focus on? These are tough questions, and finding people who can deal with these issues at all levels is tough. So every CISO I talk to will talk about the difficulty in finding talent. I would say the other issue for CISOs is having executive support. Many CISOs feel like the complexity of what they're dealing with is not appreciated by the business leaders, and they're carrying a big burden by themselves, and really grasping at ways to help business leaders understand the risks they are taking by some of the practices that they're involved in. So I would say executive support and the search for talent are the big issues that I'm hearing.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally makes sense, especially for those CISOs, a huge challenge. That conversation needs to be happening, as we went before talking about the boardroom, and that needs to be happening right there up front and being led by that CEO. This is an interesting one, which comes up quite often, and I just wanted to see what your thoughts and opinions on it are. So this concept of compliance is not security, which I've heard from people before. What are your thoughts on that, Alan?
Well, compliance and security are not the same thing, but I would say they are close friends. Compliance, as we talked about a little bit before, is something that has to be auditable. And that means auditors, and that means records and record keeping, so that you can assure someone that you're aligned with certain standards. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you're secure. So there's nothing that prevents a bad guy, no matter what standards you are compliant with, from attacking you. And the bad guy doesn't care, frankly, what standards you are compliant with. They're looking for holes in your security. And the compliance factors may or may not address security issues that they find. So we have to be compliant. We have to be focused on compliance, but we shouldn't confuse that with security. And these days, security means much more about risk management. We're never going to be completely secure. We can't eliminate all of our vulnerabilities. We have to understand which ones are really important to our business, which ones are less important to our business, and be comfortable with the way we're focusing our mitigation strategies against the most serious risks. but that's a little different process than compliance. So as I say, they're close friends, but they're not quite the same thing.
Excellent. Alan, I know that today you're involved quite a bit into even the private community here on the cybersecurity side, with technology firms and so forth. What are you seeing as trends that are interesting to you in regards to cybersecurity technology today?
There are a couple areas that I think have real promise in the cybersecurity area. One is artificial intelligence. We're today in the mode where we are depending on human beings largely to defend our networks. We have lots of terrific systems that can surface alerts and so forth and take some actions. And we have some concepts under the heading of orchestration that allow us to do some things in an automated way when we find that the enterprise is under attack. But the future is that the attackers are going to be more automated, and we as defenders are going to have to be more automated. So it's intriguing to look at what we can do with artificial intelligence and what the limits of artificial intelligence might be. How far can we take this? Can we actually have a self-defending system, for example, that can take action fast enough to mitigate risks, to automatically patch systems and so forth? So artificial intelligence is one area that I'm spending a little time in. The other area that I'm very excited about, and I feel some urgency about, has to do in the IoT space. I think by and large, we have a disconnect between people who think about enterprise security and people who think about security of what's broadly called operational technology these days. And often people who are installing operational technology, things like heating and ventilating systems or thermostats or any of the so-called IoT devices, presume that they are going to use the enterprise network for communications, and in so doing, expose the enterprise network to another vector for introduction of bad stuff. But we're not very sophisticated these days in the way we think about these things. But we have some interesting tools that would allow us to manage IoT devices differently. We have blockchains, for example. We have some interesting concepts in cryptography that allow us to distribute keys and manage key distribution in different ways that are extensible even to billions of devices. So I think we're on the cusp of having some interesting solutions in the IoT space as well. So those are two areas that I think are particularly intriguing these days.
Yeah, as a security leader, you're building a new building and all these IoT devices are being hung up and plugged into the network, and someone's saying, I'm going to plug it right in this switch, and everyone's at some point in time starts asking questions about, who's going to manage and do patch management on all these devices that you're deploying. And sometimes there's a lot of finger pointing going on at that point in time. Shanna, let's go to the poll here. It's over to you.
All right, and I think this is our last poll question, is it? So how would you describe the cybersecurity program at your company? So we are very mature in our program with policies, procedures, training, testing, detection and response. Next option is we have things in place and are starting to ramp up, or what cybersecurity program? I'd be curious also to see how these answers would vary based on someone's title. Like maybe if they were in a C-level and maybe we got a what cybersecurity program, or we have things in place versus somebody in a more technical role. All right, so go ahead.
No, I was going to say, Alan made a great point that, the leadership team today needs to be a big part of cybersecurity for sure.
Absolutely.
Where are we at?
Here are our results. So very mature, about 25%. We have things in place that are starting to ramp up, 54. Definitely not surprised by that. And what cybersecurity program? About 21%.
Alan, how's that 21% make you feel?
Yeah, that's where we are. Yep.
Yeah, that's true. I think that we're starting to get some more awareness and things are starting to shift, which I think is great. All we can do is continue to improve. I think, as you stated earlier, the leader inside of an organization is the one who can really make these things happen. Let's go to 3 tips. I guess I'll put you in the hot seat here. What are 3 tips you provide to an organization who wants to get a solid cybersecurity program started at their organization. Maybe we'll talk about the 21% here who say, what cybersecurity program? Where do they start?
Yeah. Well, I guess, the place to start is what we've already talked about a little bit, and that is trying to get some leadership focus on the issue. And that's really hard, especially as a small business. Your business is not security. Your business is trying to make payroll every week, and right. that can be tough. So it's hard to carve out time with the leadership to focus on this issue, but you have to find a way to do it. All businesses, large and small, unfortunately, are vulnerable to attack these days. That's not going to change. There's nothing coming down the road that is going to prevent us from being under attack, no matter what the size of our business happens to be. So I would say getting leadership focus is sort of the first challenge. The second challenge is trying to understand exactly what it is that's worth protecting. So you have to understand the assets in your business with the goal of understanding what doesn't have to be protected. We don't have to protect everything. We have to think about what is really important to protect. And that's different for every business. It might be that you have some key intellectual property that has to be protected. It might be customer data that has to be protected. It might be your human resource data. Whatever it is, that data or those systems may deal with them in a way that's different from the way you deal with other assets. So I would say the second focus area would be trying to understand your assets. And then the third would be putting in some kind of risk management framework for those assets. Understanding that the goal is not to be secure. No one is ever going to be 100% secure. The idea is to understand what you have to protect and what risks you're willing to take. And that risk framework is not a thing. It is not an end state. It is a process that you put in place. So I think organizations that focus in those three areas are ones that are probably doing the best they can with the resources they have.
Excellent tips. So Alan, first off, I want to say thank you for your service. I want to say thank you for joining us today and sharing all your ideas and thoughts with everyone who's on the call. We really appreciate it. Thanks again for coming. Shanna, to finish up, are there any questions here that we should address with Alan?
Yeah, we've got one question right here. The question is, Alan, I've heard suggested and would be interested in your opinion towards the likelihood of an overarching federal cyber compliance policy, perhaps based on CMMC, that might collapse some of the disparate policies that exist today.
I would look at the work that NIST has done. And my guess is that NIST 800 is going to be the focal point for the government as a whole. As you know, there are a variety of standards now that intersect with NIST. But my guess is that over time, the NIST standards are going to be the one that the government as a whole deals with, at least with respect to unclassified information. And if you look at what NIST is doing and the way it's developing standards, it is not developing standards in a vacuum. It is reaching out to all parts of government to draw them into the standard setting process. So I do think that's a direction that we're going, but it will take us a long time to get there.
Let's go to Shanna. I'm going to kick it over to you. You were going to share an offer here for everyone who's on the call, something to give to them.
Yes, absolutely. This is one of my favorite things to talk about. So during this pandemic, when a lot of companies were making that forced digital transformation and facilitating remote work and all these other things that we had to quickly adapt to, we as a company decided to put together a free essentials package for the 20-something% of you that answered with what cybersecurity program, or even if you are starting to go through and implement, you've got a few protections in place and you're looking at what you would like to add into that mix or what your next move is. We have 3 different tools that we've made available, no charge, no obligation. We took one tool from each of our 3 layers in our platform. We believe in a layer of foundation of policies, procedures, and plans, culture to tackle the human side of things, and then technology and scanning tools that go beyond antivirus and firewalls. So you get one module from each of the layers. The cybersecurity assessment tool is our health checkup. It's like going to the doctor and figuring out what is wrong. One of the things that Alan had mentioned was going through a risk management framework and understanding, what's worth protecting, how you go about doing that. That cybersecurity assessment will help you. For all of you that answered that you were under some type of compliance framework, a lot of the ones that were listed, whether it's 800, 171 or HIPAA, those are frameworks that are mapped out in that cybersecurity assessment. So definitely check that one out. Threat alerts will keep you up to date on how this industry is changing, different cybersecurity incidents or alerts that could impact your business. And then external network vulnerability scanning. So just making sure that everything on the outside of your network is nice and secure, that you don't have any holes or exposures that could leave you vulnerable. So the link there is defendify.io/essentials. We'll get you all set up with the portal. You can either do a self-navigation and set those 3 modules up, or we'd be happy to jump on a call and assist you in getting those initial protections in place.
Shanna, thank you so much, and thanks for helping us moderate and keep things on track. Alan, thanks again for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Rob. And come see us and visit the Spy Museum.
I can't wait. I'm looking forward to it.